Nora, we are following breaking news of an active shooter attack outside a military base in Hawaii. Witnesses say there are multiple gunshot victims from the attack at the Pearl Harbour naval shipyard. There are reports of 3 people rushed to an area hospital. Authorities say the shooting started around 2:30 p.m. The base was placed on lockdown and people were urged to take cover. There is a heavy police presence at the scene and there are reports the shooter is down.
North Korea's diplomatic thaw looking more like a deep freeze. New images show Kim Jong-un riding a white horse, touring snow-covered battle sites on Mount Perpetual, his second visit to the sacred mountain in 2 months. Kim has a track record of visiting the sacred site before making big announcements.
Whenever he goes up to this Mount Perpetual, he does something, to give a shock to the rest of the world.
The shock of short-range missile launches is wearing off. Last week, the 13th weapons test this year, a year that began with diplomatic disappointment, the collapse of summit talks in Vietnam.
U.S. President Donald Trump is back in Washington after leaving the NATO summit in London earlier than planned. He abruptly cancelled a final news conference after the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was caught on camera allegedly making fun of him with other world leaders.
Well, he's two-faced.
Do you think that Germany is too naive?
And honestly, with Trudeau, he's a nice guy. I find him to be a very nice guy. But, you know, the truth is that I called him out on the fact that he's not paying 2%. And I guess he's not very happy about it.
Mr. Trudeau's comments were picked up by microphones at a reception for NATO leaders. He was caught laughing about his experience where he noted how Mr. Trump's team's jaws dropped to the floor at his long impromptu news conferences.
This decision could escalate tensions between Russia and Western countries. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has defended the expulsion of Russian diplomats after Germany's Attorney General said evidence points to Russian state involvement.
I'll be meeting the Russian president next week, and then I will let you know whether I have spoken with him and how that goes. We've taken this measure, as you know, mainly because we have seen that Russia is not supporting us in investigating this murder. And of course, I've spoken with allies about this through bilateral contacts.
In August, a Georgian national was shot dead in Berlin in broad daylight. Soon after the assassination, suspicions arose that the Russian intelligence services were involved.
Well, tonight, the 2 co-founders of Google resigned from their executive posts this week. It's happening as the U.S. is threatening to ban Huawei for its ties to the Chinese government. But get this, Google has troubling ties to our government, specifically Pentagon, CIA, NSA.
That's right. I mean, as of yesterday, Larry Page and Sergey Brin announced that they were leaving their roles as Alphabet's CEO and president. However, they will still retain a majority of the company's voting shares and thus their control over the board. But I'm glad you brought up the relationship between Google and the state, because this is a relationship that goes back all the way into the early 2000s, if not earlier. As one example, this year, Google spent $21 million lobbying the U.S. government, but that's perhaps the most overt example of this relationship. And the real relationship is actually more covert.
With a national strike looming on December 5th, history could repeat itself in France. In November 1995, millions took to the streets to protest welfare reforms put forward by the government. Paris was crippled, transport ground to a halt as people were forced to find a different way to work. The reason for the outrage? The surprise announcements by then Prime Minister Alain Juppé of sweeping social welfare reforms. He sought to bring the public pension system in line with that of the private sector. On the 15th of November 1995, he defended his proposals before Parliament. Macron's desire to pass his legislation is reminiscent of the passion displayed by Juppé, but the anger that derailed the plan in 1995 also exists today. Just like then, France's two main railway companies have already announced plans to strike.
Huawei has launched new legal action against the U.S. over claims the Chinese telecoms giant is a security risk. And it's just the latest source of tension between Beijing and Washington as they try to hammer out a trade deal.
Huawei wants the court to throw out a ban by the U.S. Federal Communications Commission that bars rural phone carriers from using American government money to purchase its equipment. The ruling was put in place after the government agency voted unanimously to designate Huawei and its peer ZTE Corp as national security risks. The Chinese tech giant called it a political decision. This is the firm's second legal challenge in the U.S. this year as it pushes back against restrictions imposed by the Trump administration.
Well, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill to impose sanctions on Chinese officials for the country's treatment of Uighur Muslims. Now, more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities are kept in what Beijing calls re-education camps. Now, the bill aims to end the, quote, arbitrary detention, torture, and harassment of this Muslim minority community. China's foreign ministry has criticized the bill as a smear. Beijing says the camps provide vocational training.
South Korean President Moon Jae-in is hoping China can help calm the situation on the Korean peninsula. The call for support came during Mr. Moon's meeting China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi.
North Korea has already put the U.S. on notice, giving Washington until the end of the year to show more flexibility in nuclear talks.
President Moon has asked for China's support until the Korean peninsula is nuclear-free and there's permanent peace here. In a meeting that lasted for about 1.5 hours, President Moon said the process of bringing peace and denuclearizing the Korean peninsula was currently at an important crossroads. Experts say President Moon, like everyone else, is aware of the rising tension here on the Korean peninsula, with the U.S. and North Korea warning that military action was on the table if there was a need to use it.
They were displaced by 6 years of civil war, and now they're again forced out of their homes, this time by floods, which in South Sudan have destroyed crops, homes, and livelihoods. People say they haven't seen such devastation in more than 20 years. It's rainy season in East Africa, but the downpours have been unusually heavy this year. Nearly 3 million people are affected by floods across the region, most in South Sudan. Last month, the government declared a state of national emergency. Aid is pouring in, but that's not enough.